Hasselblad recently announced the 907X. I was able to borrow its fraternal twin, the 907X Special Edition. It is the same camera, but with a different skin. This one's all matte black, and it was introduced to celebrate the 50th anniversary of the first moon landing, so it also has this special On the Moon badge. Sleek, right? But the guts are the same, so if you are interested in either camera, stick around. I borrowed the 907X SE along with two XCD prime lenses from Hasselblad for several weeks. And I also happened to have the Fujifilm GFX 100 on loan during the same time period, and I already shared my review on that, so I will link to my gear reviews playlist in the description of this video so that you can check that out if you'd like. And one more thing here before we dive in. Members, make sure that you watch the member exclusive video this week. Right now, we are testing out what Raymond just showed you.
It's like you're an eyeball and the world's happening around you because it's composing everything. So you can make 10 different videos out of a single 360 video.
What are you doing?
What could go wrong?
Members help keep this channel up and running, so they get extra videos, long-form courses, and more. You can click the link below to learn more about channel membership, or current members, there's a link below for you too. But before you go check out those links, let's go back to the Hasselblad 907X SE. Let's have a quick primer on what this camera is for those of you who may be new to Hasselblad. First, this is digital medium format. More on that later. The 907X and SE are a part of Hasselblad's V system, which is modular. The camera body itself is in two parts, the camera and the digital back. And then you have interchangeable lenses. Both the 907X and the SE variant are offered with the CFV250C digital back. And Hasselblad's XCD lenses pair natively with the body. I'll get back to the idea of the modular body a little bit later, but for now, let's simply discuss the camera as one piece. And you'll notice that this body is a different shape than you might be used to with other cameras out there. Let's start there. The camera is designed for waist level shooting. It's a throwback to film cameras where you looked down into a viewfinder to see the scene that you're capturing. However, some vast technological advancements have been made since then, so what you look down at is a beautiful LCD screen that flips out. I wasn't sure actually how I would feel about not having a viewfinder on the camera, or if I would even like this style of shooting where you are holding a cube basically, but I did like it a lot. And it really is that usability that sets the camera apart from other Hasselblad digital medium format options. But before I explain that more, how you use the camera, what it's like to use the camera, let's look at some of my results. This camera contains a 50 megapixel medium format sensor. Medium format means that the sensor is larger than a full frame sensor. And that means more sensor, which means more light and a greater sense of depth to your images. And that also means that you apply a crop factor of less than 1 to the focal length listed on the lens to understand your 35mm effective field of view. So when I used the XCD 30mm and 90mm lenses, I was seeing the equivalent of 24mm and 71mm on a full frame sensor or 35mm film. Hasselblad reports 14 stops of dynamic range in the 16-bit raw files that this camera outputs. But that's really just a number. It's how that dynamic range is spread out that tells the real story. And all I can say is, wow. I was able to take photos in very difficult lighting situations, like a very bright sky with a darkened foreground, and bring out details in post-processing. But where I think I can see the greatest difference in looking at my photos captured with medium format over smaller sensors, full frame, APS-C, and on down, is the bright areas of the frame. As I do a lot of landscape work, the sky is the most common place that I see it. The way medium format, this camera included, actually captures the gradual changes from color to color, from tone to tone in the sky is breathtaking. I certainly didn't end up with a completely white sky like I could have with other cameras, but Beyond that, there's no banding or awkward transitions. It's this smooth and, above all, realistic representation of what I saw with my eyes. I appreciate the freedom the sensor allows me to make my art between being in the field and later on at the computer. Now, when you are at the computer, you'll notice that a 50 megapixel medium format sensor provides some pretty large files. The raw files are a little over 100 megabytes each, so you will need to consider that when choosing your memory cards. This camera holds two UHS 2 compatible SD cards, by the way, and also when storing and backing up your images. Also know that these files do take a certain amount of computing power to edit. Depending upon your computer, it may take extra time rendering files as you are previewing them. But if you are looking at a medium format camera, speed probably isn't your primary concern anyway. All right, back to the body. The ergonomics and the usability. Because even if a camera gives me those incredible files to work with, if I don't like using the camera, I'm not going to use it. And we are each definitely going to like different things about a camera's usability, so I do always recommend getting a camera in your hands, even if it's just for a few minutes in a shop, prior to making a purchase. But here's what I can tell you about the 907X SE. The body itself is so small. Hasselblad says it's their smallest ever. So the boxy design was still comfortable to hold in my palm, and the controls are in all of the natural places. The shutter release button is on the front, so the same hand that is holding the camera presses that button. And there is a dial around the shutter release and an additional button around the side of the body which allow you to adjust exposure. So if you are in manual, turning the dial alone adjusts aperture, and pushing the side button and turning the dial adjusts shutter speed. And then if you are in the other modes, there are other combinations of adjustments. And as I mentioned, the placement of these buttons is natural, so I quickly became accustomed to making adjustments with them. The one thing that I did wish for was a way to adjust ISO sensitivity with buttons or dials on the body. You do have to go into the menu for that. That meant that I wasn't seeing my scene as I was changing ISO on the menu. Now, for an experienced photographer, that really isn't a big deal, aside from it slowing you down a little bit. But if you are new to photography, or you're just not super practiced in knowing what to expect when adjusting exposure, you'll have some back and forth between making settings changes in the menu and then switching to live view until you have your exposure the way you want it. We'll get back to the menus in just a moment, but first, since we're looking at the body now, you can see a few additional buttons on the back, which come away from the body with the LCD screen. It makes for, again, a very easy to use setup, and you can purchase an add-on viewfinder and a grip to add for those times when you want to use them. The grip even has some additional controls on it so that you don't have to go into the menu as much. Now for the menus. Once you press the menu button, this initial menu screen pops up. You navigate completely through touch here. Touch is not typically my favorite way to navigate menus, but because of the quality of the touch screen, it worked very well, and the form factor of the camera, and I think simply because I'm getting more used to doing it, I didn't find myself complaining to myself about it. You can change many of your settings here on this initial screen, your exposure settings, your focus settings, nearly everything that you would want to adjust during shooting is here. And then pressing the menu button again gets you to the full menu. These are well organized and easy to understand. This initial screen is icon based, and you can actually change what you see here. You can add your most commonly used settings, and you can tap on these three lowest icons for the full menus. You also use the touchscreen to move your autofocus point. I found myself using my thumb to tap the area of the screen without having to move my finger off of the shutter release button. Again, the quality of the screen is paramount here, because it actually works. While we're on the subject of autofocus, I will say that the autofocus is certainly accurate, but not quick. Like I said before, if you're looking at medium format, speed is probably not your primary concern. I mentioned in the beginning that this camera system is modular. You have the camera with a digital back on it, which contains the sensor. What that means is that you can put the digital back on older V-System film cameras, and theoretically, you can use it on future cameras, or vice versa. You can use future digital backs on this camera. This means that this camera is an investment. While you are spending a good deal of money on this camera, you will not only be able to use the lenses on future bodies, you will be able to use parts of the camera itself on other cameras. It's mix and match. And actually, if you haven't seen Ted's first impressions video of the 907X over on his Art of Photography channel, you can see him put the digital back on one of his old film bodies, and that's pretty cool. And beyond using the pieces of this camera for a long time, Hasselblad does also offer meaningful firmware updates, which I also appreciate. Okay, I certainly haven't discussed all of the specifications and the details of this camera. Video capability, the 16-bit RAW files, tethering and charging via USB-C, Wi-Fi. There's a leaf shutter in each XCD lens. I could go on. And really, specifications are good to learn because there may be one or two or three that really turns you on to or off of the camera. But the important thing for you to know about this camera is that you will achieve phenomenal results with it. You have lots of pixels, lots of dynamic range. The colors are dreamy. But it's really the experience with the camera that will have you picking it up off the shelf time and again, if that is waist level shooting is your thing. It's definitely that experience that, for me at least, it got me in sync with the camera and truly enjoying what I was doing, which naturally leads to better results. So while at first glance you might look at this camera and get a little bit intimidated, like, gosh, there's a camera, a digital back, the ergonomics are completely different from my other cameras. But actually, this camera is very easy to use, especially if you take the time to get to know it and to make some customizations to the menus. Before we close up shop here, I used the Hasselblad's X1D2 a few months ago, which has very similar specifications to the 907X and SE. And it uses the same lenses, but it's more of a traditional camera setup. And I naturally compared the two in my mind. And while the X1D2 was a joy to use, I spent hours hiking with it at Bryce Canyon. The 907X SE holds something special for me, and it's the user experience. I pretty much want 9 out of 10 cameras that come through here, but the experience with this camera is something special. Remember, there are links in the description of this video to learn more about channel membership and to find this week's member exclusive video, and also to this camera and the lenses I used, and to my gear reviews playlist if you want to see more photography gear reviews from all sorts of different brands. That Fuji GFX 100 review is there, and so is my review of the Hasselblad X1D2. But before you go do that, please give this video a like and subscribe if you haven't already. Those two simple things help this channel tremendously. And you know, I'd love to hear from you down in the comments. What do you think of waist level shooting? Is it enticing to you? Or do you use a camera like that already? And what do you love about it? And thank you for watching.